Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest in the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today my guest is Mark Musselman, and he is a coach, a trusted advisor, and speaker at MX5 Consulting. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Adam. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, Mark, we got a lot to talk about. So a lot of business owners, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of executives that watch this show and producing results, clarifying our vision and really making sure we're not doing busy work. I mean, that's a big deal. We want more productivity. We want more profit. We want more success. We want more, whatever it is we're searching for. So excited to get into that with you and also what you're doing at MX5 Consulting, how you're helping companies and organizations and individuals. But before we do that, let's start this episode the way that we start them all with what we like to call our Mission Matters Minute. So Mark, at Mission Matters, our aim and our goal is to amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's what we do. Mark, what mission matters to you?
Well, I think the biggest mission that I've been on, and it started with my own mission, is to get to the truth in the heart of things that matter to business owners and senior leaders. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people live in the world of pretense. I did. A lot of my clients live in the world of pretense. There's something that they, don't want to reveal, right? Because it might be associated with a sense of embarrassment or shame. It's a deficit. And I love to provoke the space where those little, I'll call them secrets or those vulnerabilities reside and tease them out so that we can have an honest conversation about the things that matter most and the things that are probably most likely getting in the way of somebody being extraordinary at what they do instead of just being average or good.
It's great. Love bringing mission-based individuals on here to share why they do what they do, how they're doing it, and really what we can all learn from that and, tips and things we can take away to, improve our lives as well. So let's go back in time a bit, Mark. Like, how'd you get into this, world of business and becoming an advisor and really just consulting in general? Where'd all that begin for you?
Well, I had the opportunity when I was young to be part of a family business. I started my career outside of my family's business, which I think, as a note to anybody here who's involved in one, every family member should have to start somewhere else, their career somewhere else before they are able to join a family business. So I spent a couple of years in the world of the Gallo family, selling wine and becoming a good merchant. I took those skill sets into a family business. And then
was given a merchant, Mark. That's pretty cool. Though, actually, I always wanted to be in some type of business like that. I'm not going to happen now, but it seems cool to me.
It is cool. And I loved what I was doing. And then I looked and, immediately to my side was my family's business. It was a very small business. There were like 8 people. And, my father and his brother had started it. And they had aspirations that went well beyond where they had taken the company. And I had all these skills and I got offered at 30 years old to come in and basically take over my family's business, which was an enormous responsibility. We had several hundred employees and, it was a good sized business, about 5,000 customers. And I knew enough at that point that I knew that I didn't know a lot, right? On how to lead and run a business. So
you were 30 with that potential. Wow. That's young, Mark.
Yeah. And I would almost say probably too young. And I mean that, reflecting back on it, it was probably, too young for me to have been given that opportunity. So I knew that, and I hired a coach. This isn't way before coaching was a thing. So I reached out. I had a circle of people in the Denver metro area, hired a guy. And I just said, listen, I'm really committed to being, very effective in this role, but I know enough. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me grow and, evolve as a leader? So that began, really for me, probably the first thing in my life I've ever truly found a passion around. I mean, I was a decent student through school, got a degree in economics, but, interested, but not deeply committed. So this idea of leadership, when I began down that path, it just woke me up. It was like, wow, there is so much more to the idea. First of all, what do we even mean when we use the word leadership? And then as I began my own path of discovery, that was the first step. And I hired that same guy for a few years in a row. And fortunately, I worked for a business that had the means to, pay for that initially. I did pay for coaching and have many times personally, but at that point in time, the company was investing in me and sort of developing my skills. And, obviously at 30 years old, there's a lot of other traps, ego being the biggest one, right? So, I'd say that piqued my interest. And the more I dove and got deeper into it, the more I discovered that I loved it and I wanted it to be my life, basically. And, sometimes you choose actively to make that change. And in my case, my family's business in that 2008-9 window went through bankruptcy. So, there was this 50-year-old legacy business, a couple hundred employees, et cetera. We went through bankruptcy. So at the back end of that process, I was sitting there thinking, well, what do I do now? I ended up working for about 16 months for the group that had bought the business through the bankruptcy and repositioned it. And so I said, well, I know what I want to do. I want to go help other, in particular at the outset, family business owners avoid the experience that I just went through, because it was awful. In every way, emotionally, physically, psychologically, financially. I mean, it was a hot mess. And so I figured, well, I've got to have, I just had the most expensive master's or PhD you can get. So I went out and I put a shingle up, and then I began to reach out to other family-owned organizations and asking them, mostly either the founder, the entrepreneur who put it, or maybe his second generation or her second generation, and said, I'm here. Do you have a need? And if so, let's begin. And so that's how I got into it. And then the more I did that work, what I soon discovered is that, I had chosen a path down a single industry at that point in time. And there were all these other amazing industries and businesses. And the more I was able to be of service to people, the more I grew. And the more I grew, the more curious I became. So I've done work across so many different industries, and, from solopreneurs to, I worked for a number of years inside some of the Fortune 50 organizations as a consultant and a coach. And, so that's how I got into it, almost by necessity. I had 4 kids, broke as broke could possibly be, no idea what to do next, carrying shame and guilt you would, so I cloaked myself in sort of victimhood during that window, and then, had to climb out of that and feed my kids and contribute to the family. I had 2 mortgages, and, it was a hot mess of a period of my life, but I loved it, in terms of in retrospect.
Wow. I'm always a fan of when somebody starts a business out of not necessity because they're going through pain, but when they really, figure something out and they understand that all this pain or all these things that they've gone through can be a benefit when sharing those stories and those experiences with others. So maybe they don't have to go through those same type of experiences. And that can obviously be in business. It can be in personal. It can be in a lot of different niches. Just in general, I'm always a big fan of that. I'm curious on your end from, working from all these different industries, different types of, and let's keep it, I guess, for the moment on the family business side of things, and we can expand from there, but let's keep it on the family side just for a moment. Are there any themes or what are some of the blind spots that you see as you've worked with many, many organizations, specifically the family organizations or family business? What kind of blind spots do a lot of them have out there? Are there themes that you see reoccurring over and over and over again by the definition of sometimes it could be a 50-year-old business it's the way we've always done things, or that type of culture versus something else? Any blind spots?
Yeah, I'd say the single biggest, most consistent blind spot is, in a regular non-family owned business, there's I call it a hierarchy, a structure, right? And authority and decision-making for the most part tends to follow a sense of order. If you have shareholders, they elect a board, and then, that board, hires a CEO, and the CEO serves the leisure of the board, and it's pretty structured. And the roles are distinct. In a family business, there are 3 very specific and distinct circles. There's a family circle, right? That entails all the dynamics that a family would bring into a family business. There's the management roles that people take on, and sometimes there are family members that are not part of management. and then there's the ownership circle, right? And so what I find more, and this is a really well established model. It was built at, I think, Harvard with some guys years ago. But one of the things that I would say is almost universally true is that those circles tend to collapse on top of one another. And so sometimes you can be in a business that's a family-owned business, and you're having a conversation you think is around a management issue, but really it's a rivalry between two siblings. It has nothing to do with the business at all, but it basically looks like it does. And so you can get really off track when those circles collapse. And sort of akin to that is that I maybe there's an exception to this, but it's very rare, and I rarely come across it, which all three of those circles are all subservient to the family dynamic, and at the end of the day, most of the issues that a family business confronts have some kind of origin or root in the family. And so part of my job in that world, when I have the pleasure of working with a family, is to tease those circles apart, right? And let's just really get clear about what are family issues and what's your process, as a family to work at, becoming more effective at solving those challenges. And then, what are true management issues and what's our structure and our system and our process to, attack and solve managerial issues. And then, the ownership has other traps like fairness and equity, which are, really charged subjects when you get into, family related dynamics. As we know, they say, money is the root of all evil. I'm not sure if I believe that fully, but I do know it is a often incredibly destructive force in a family owned business, around fairness and equity in particular. So those are some broad things I'd share. And then I could give you a list of 20 other things that, tend to be more particular to family-owned business than they would be to a for-profit, nonprofit government entity. So
can you give me an example? I'm trying to figure out or trying to picture what it could look like to work with your team, or how one of these situations could play out.
Well, I'll use a personal example. I had no reason for me to use a client. So I said that my family's business went through bankruptcy. 50 years in my family's hands, and I'm one of 5 kids, right? So there's, any one of us, all 5 of us actively working in the management of the business, as owners of the business, and as family members in the business. And
man, that sounds like that's a lot of collapsing rings, man.
A lot of collapsing rings. 100%. This is why I use this example, because I lived it, right? And so when my dad decided to retire, we went through a selection process, and I'm 4th out of 5, and I'm the 3rd of the 5 to join the business as a sibling. And I have an immediate older brother who I love dearly, who had been in the business before I had, who understandably, in retrospect, felt he deserved the opportunity to become the CEO, but he wasn't selected. I was. And there's reasons for that, but I don't think he ever really fully accepted. He actually never fully accepted that. So for years, 10 years during my role as CEO, he and I were in conflict. And the conflict that we were in is he felt that I was unjustly, undeservedly put into that role. And so, I'd say left and he'd wait till the meeting ended and he'd go say right. I'd say up and he'd wait till the meeting ended and he'd go say down. I'd say hot, he'd say, it was, and so we had this entire organization of 300 people roughly who didn't know whether we should go up or down, right or left, and so it had nothing to do with the actual fundamentals of the business. It was a family dynamic that got in the way of our effectiveness and our ability to own, lead, and run the business. And we also hit some bad timing with all the craziness that happened in 2008, 2009.
Yeah, 2008. Let me bring that up for our younger listeners here. Look up 2008. Look up the housing crisis, the wreck. Everything was going down. Stock market, bond market, real estate. Everything was going down. So that was a tough period. And little fun fact for our listeners. I started my career outside of my hire date at one of the first firms I worked outside of college. The Vanguard Group was at the absolute height of the market. Mark, if you looked on a bar chart, I could find my date anytime. I can find what my exact start date was, because from that day on, the market went down.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a matter of timing, right? So, yeah. I
just had to throw that one out there. You shared a story. I had one for you too, Mark.
Well, the thing about that is, I think obviously timing and circumstances can get the better of you. Yeah. We had an existing condition in the business that further complicated an external set of dynamics, right? So it was like the perfect storm. And if you were to query any of my 7 family members that were actively in the business in our generation, 7 out of 7 of us would tell you that the reason the company ultimately went the way it did was because of the dysfunction that existed in the relationship between me and my immediate older brother.
So it's a big deal. Like for business owners, entrepreneurs out there listening, and especially if you got a family business, multiple generations within the same business, it's a big deal. Like that type of, it matters. Yeah.
Well, I say somewhat tongue in cheek to clients that are thinking about bringing in family members, to go. I mean, basically a family business is 2 or more family members involved in the activity of the business. I say it's with great fear and trepidation. You step into this ring, and the other thing that I will say is that like 2 years prior to us having gone into that bankruptcy window, we were offered as a family, a very good amount of money from a buyer who was making a strategic roll up in our industry. And we said no. And so another cautionary tale is, we allowed emotion to kind of guide the process of deciding yes or no, which I see often is the case. Like founders can't let go of a business emotionally. It's like a child, right? I mean, so we always say that my parents had 5 children and my dad had 6. So it's just really true. And so there's an emotional tie. It's like your identity, so many things wrapped up into it. And the statistics are pretty daunting. When you think about family businesses successfully transitioning from first to second and then second to third generation,
second to third is like a complete drop off, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. And so you really have to have a lot of arrogance, to believe that you have everything it takes to successfully transition, or you have to have phenomenal systems. And we had an amazing culture. If you talk to any of the 300 people who worked, in our business, they would tell you they loved it. A lot of values that you would probably naturally identify with a family business. And we were a loving family. And, so a lot of the people who worked there, were there because of the culture. And I always hear, people say, if you focus on the people, the business will take care of itself. No, you got to take care of the business too. Right. So, it's a little piece in there is like, you really don't want to ignore that piece.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, Mark. I mean, I know that's a lot to unpack there, and I wanna switch here slightly and transition. Let's get into some of the work you're doing and how you and strategic planning and one-on-one coaching. Like we see like some of the symptoms and what can happen and what can even like some family business owners what may watch or listen to this right now and think, oh, you know what, some of these things have been on their mind, right? Like on their mind because it's there, especially if someone's thinking about retiring or if somebody's nearing that age in the next, X amount of years. Like, so what's some of the work that you're doing to actually help, in either transition or otherwise in leading up to making sure that there's good outcomes for those that have invested, their blood, sweat, and tears into these businesses?
Yeah. Well, so I'll stick with the transition. I just have recently onboarded a new family business client, and they're in a generational transition from, founder Gen 1 to Gen 2. And so what I can say about that is, it's understandable. The older generation, the founder has all this, gathered wisdom and experience and years of service. And that's a well of knowledge, right? It's an incredible well of knowledge. And oftentimes the incoming generation, I'll raise my hand, has a desire to be significant, who wants to exercise and express their intellect and their capabilities, and and may want to, I'll just say, push aside or ignore or not honor because it's ego wise it's a little bit of a threat, and they may have been judging the founder as capable in some areas but vastly incapable in others, and so what happens, instead of creating an incredibly healthy environment where those, I'll just say, two individuals meet together, they collaborate together, they openly share ideas, they're working to get on the same page. The younger incoming generation is, a sponge for anything, everything that the founding generation can provide in terms of insights and knowledge, instead of pushing that generation away. I had a client a couple of years ago, they had an amazing business up in Oregon, and the incoming generation, there was a woman who's stepping in to run their family business, had not just sort of ego challenges because she has two brothers that did not get selected. And so, it's now I really have to demonstrate my worth. I really have to make sure that everybody's aware of how capable I am. And so it can be a massive overreach. And then you get the hurt feelings, you get the wounds, then it just further degrades the quality of conversation and collaboration, when all of those things can be avoided by a really thoughtful approach to succession planning and transition. And one of the things that I love doing is getting in and I share my story. I was the guy, I was 30 years old. I mean, you can't find the 30-year-old who doesn't have a healthy ego, and I was all that. And my dad was doing everything he could to be helpful. And I was like, yeah, you're cute. Thank you. You don't know this, but I know everything I need to know at 30, so let's just get you into the tournament. Let's get you on the golf course, whatever. And I mean, I'm maybe exaggerating to a point, but the reality was that I felt like he was in the way, and I had more judgment for him than I did love and honoring of him, if that makes sense. And I see this happening all the time. So, I think that transition is really, one of the most delicate things. And if you're intending to pass on the legacy of a business, which is an incredible enterprise to be passed on, you have to take an incredibly thoughtful, thorough, comprehensive, I mean, I'll put all more adjectives, but you can't just accidentally fall into it and hope and somehow expect that things are going to work well, So no, it's very thoughtful. It's very intentional. It's very structured, and within that, there's a lot of room to play, right? Because unique people show up and unique businesses show up with all kinds of dynamics. But, I would throw a massive caution flag to anybody who isn't thinking about it along those lines.
So it seems like the family element, I mean, it just adds a completely different dimension to typical business from the standpoint of, and you're not using these words, I am, but it's almost like you're playing therapist, advisor, strategic planning, like on the physical business side of things and how things should be structured. You're probably running point with some of the teams, right? The lawyers, the accountants, like the other individuals that may be doing maybe if there's another type of consultant doing some of the number crunching or other things, I don't know. It sounds to me like you're kind of like the glue or the coach, or you kind of like running point on all of that. Am I off on that? I'm just trying to make sure my understanding is accurate.
No, I think you're spot on. And I always kind of approach the conversation this way, right? I mean, I make the assumption that you know how to run your business. Technically, all the things that have allowed the company to, basically prosper to this point in time. What you likely might not have ever spent time, considering or working on are all the emotional, intelligent components of transitioning a business, working in the family dynamic, and that's not just limited to a family business, but it's most obvious in that environment for understandable reasons. But yeah, I mean, so a lot of the work that I do is, like you said, putting together a group of trusted advisors and listen, I'm not a lawyer. So I depend on people who have an expertise in the law. I'm not an accountant, so I depend on people as sort of collaborative partners that I would bring into that. I mean, I bring in, experienced family systems counselors and therapists if the circumstance requires that, because there are oftentimes when you get start peeling the layers of the onion away, you'll get into some issues that require that level of expertise and nuance that is really not my forte. So I'm really clear where my lane is, and I stick to that lane. And whenever things spill outside that lane, I love bringing in partners to help guide and advise the family or the business forward.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you're also an author and a speaker. Talk to me a little bit about that part of your work.
Yeah, so I'm saying aspiring author. So I have finished the first draft of a book that is a culmination of basically 20 plus years doing executive level one-to-one coaching. And it's out right now for editing. So my expectation is I'd have that done, finished, edited, and ready to be either self-published, or I might go down a traditional path. I'm not sure. I've heard different things about those two routes, but
sure.
By the end of this
year, is the 2025 release. Then come on, man, I'm putting you
2025 release. So, and it's just really basically called The Coaching Advantage. Like, I don't know, and I have been in an ownership or senior leadership role in 4 companies. I have a company right now that I'm part of, an ownership and leadership group. It's based in Dublin, Ireland. It's a restaurant chain, a growing restaurant chain. And so I speak about this from first person experience, right? But I don't know a more effective way for organizational leadership to identify and solve probably the top 10 biggest challenges that organizations face that are more effective than one-to-one coaching.
Yeah.
So that's the nature of the book.
Well, Mark, it's been great having you on the show today. I have to say that, I learned a lot. Appreciate the stories you shared, man. And also you being so vulnerable to tell your story, man. That was I was feeling it. Once you said you were 30 in that position, and then you got 2008 and you got all these layers, I'm like, oh, I was feeling for you. And I'm sure your clients, they understand as well, based on you sharing that, how helpful that is for them. I just have to ask, you got the book coming out. What's next? What's on the horizon for the, rest of the year and so on?
Yeah. So I have, at 59, I think, finally arrived at a point in my life where I feel like I have something to share that's not based out of ego, that's based out of experience and wisdom and, just time in conversations with, some amazing clients. So I'm in the process of pivoting more directly into sort of a keynote speaking career where the impact it's instead of one-to-one, which I also think is one-to-many, because as the work is effective with an organizational leader or an entrepreneur, that's exponential, right? It comes across an organization. But I've really always been drawn to the stage. So I'm in theater. I'm in a theater company in Denver that I've been active for 25 years. So I'm in the process of transitioning to mostly speaking, and then I'm going to have that book as a complement to that platform. So that's where I'm heading. I'll still do a lot of the work that has been part of what I've done for the last 20 years, which is the one-to-one executive coaching and strategic planning. I work on a lot of culture things with organizations and clients of mine, but I'm ready to share something that I think has true value, which is this idea of getting into the hidden spaces, the gaps that we all have, and provoking what's hidden in there and bringing it out so that I can, you can, we can all incrementally, right, continuously improve and be a better version of ourselves as leaders, because the world right now is in desperate need of extraordinary leaders, period.
Amazing. Mark, how do people follow up? How do they follow up? How do they connect with you and your team?
Yeah, I'd say the easiest way is, I have a website, mx5consulting.com. There's a contact, link in there. My email is Mark with a K at mx5consulting.com. Those are probably the 2 easiest. And you can follow me if you wanted to on LinkedIn. I tend to be most active there, occasionally on Instagram and sometimes TikTok when when my kids don't make fun of me.
Amazing. For everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put some links in the show notes so you can just click on them and head right on over and connect with Mark. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day, we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way in your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Mark, thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Have a great rest of your day.